So this year's Sight and Sound poll has probably been the most anticipated, film event in film culture, contemporary film culture. At least to me, I've been waiting for it for quite a while. 2 years, 3 years. I've been really waiting. What are going to be these year's results? I was pretty convinced that Vertigo is going to stay at number one. I've been pretty clear on this on Twitter, and uh, you know, whenever somebody asked me, what do I think will stay number one, I said Vertigo, but well, it's not Vertigo. In fact, the number one is Jean Dielman, as most of you probably already know, and I think it is very surprising. Like I didn't expect it at all. I know that in the internet, some people have already been speculating on it because, for example, Twitter user Eric Henderson, he made a last minute guess, uh, saying Jean Dillman. I was like, come on, that can't be real, but it actually is. It really surprised me, and it's a good movie. I mean, I watched it yesterday. Given that these results have just been published, and I wanted to watch it, and it's a really good movie. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's number one. Like to me, I think that is definitely an overstatement, and especially putting it next to some of those movies like Tokyo Story, Citizen Kane, and Vertigo. I think it feels a little out of place there. Um, I don't know. It's certainly a very interesting movie. I mean, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Uh, but it's certainly certainly an interesting pick, and also it's a film directed by a woman. So obviously there have been already plenty of people suggesting maybe the reason why this movie is number one is because a lot of voters wanted to have at least one female directed movie on their list or on their ballot, and that's why kind of it jumped to number one. Whether that is the case, like this kind of whether this is the case or not. Uh, I mean, I, I suppose that's just the people how people vote. I mean, that's their right, and I mean, as far as female directed movies go, this is certainly one of the best. I haven't seen that many, but this is certainly one of the best. So, um, you know, as far as best female directed movie on the list, I think it's a good pick. Personally, I have to say I actually prefer Je tue il by the same director, Chantal Ackerman. I think she's a very good director, a very provocative director. Obviously, in her first film, Je tue il I think is actually a little bit better than Jean Dielman. But this is certainly the most highly regarded, generally speaking. So it's understandable why this would be her highest pick. Then number two, we've got obviously Vertigo. So I suppose my speculation that Vertigo is going to stay number one, it was wrong, but I wasn't far off. So it didn't drop down a lot. I've heard a couple of people say that it's going to this was just a phase from 2012, and it clearly wasn't. It clearly wasn't just a phase. I think it still has a fair shot at going back to number one. Maybe the next decade. I don't know. So this is directed by Alfred Hitchcock, who, by the way, is my favorite director, at least at the moment. He has been for a couple of years, and actually, I would say, although he's now no longer in the spotlight, and although all the news articles, all the headlines are speaking about, Jean Dielman, understandably, I think this is actually, I don't think this is a bad poll result for Hitchcock because he has four movies on this poll. He also had the same four movies in the last poll in the 2012 version, which I have got over here. So, uh, and three of his movies, so that is North by Northwest, Rear Window, and Psycho, they moved up. They moved up several spots. It's only Vertigo that moved down one spot. So I think certainly that this was a pretty good poll result, but we're going to have to wait until the individual ballots are going to be released, and we're going to see how many votes each film had, because then we can actually calculate, what percentage of voters voted for a Hitchcock movie. Uh, my speculation is that it actually might have increased the percentage because all other movies by him have again they've moved up several ranks. So I think it's certainly a good pull for Hitchcock. Um, Orson Welles obviously he dropped from number two to number three, and also his Magnificent Ambersons. And also Touch of Evil, they dropped out of the top 100 completely, which is a shame because, especially, I think The Magnificent Ambersons is a really, really good movie, and it deserves to be in the top 100, I would say. Tokyo Story, of course, that's an all-timer. And a surprising thing, it took me by surprise certainly, is that 2001: A Space Odyssey did not move up. So it's at number six, and it was at number six in the 2012 poll as well. so many people thought this was going to turn number one. I didn't think so. I think it was Vertigo, as I said, but I thought it was going to move up from number six, but it did not, which is interesting. But we've got like the Rules of the Game and Sunrise, which moved down a couple of spots, which is pretty understandable because they are two, very old movies. I think they're both great. Sunrise is my favorite movie. At least if you ask me what is my favorite movie, I would say it's Sunrise. But they've moved down a bit. Obviously, Sunrise to 11 and the Rules of the Game to place to spot 13. So we see a lot of those classics. They're beginning to move down and being replaced with some new movies, for better or for worse. I certainly like those classics, but there's certainly a lot of great stuff in some of those new movies. The Searchers is a movie that dropped down. That was that was obvious that was going to drop down. Possibly because of John Wayne. He doesn't have the best reputation, and he was a pretty bad person, at least from what I've read of him. But I personally think the movie is great. It would have been in my hypothetical ballot, and I thought it was going to drop down, but I didn't think it was going to go out of the top 10. Same with Sunrise. I already said on Twitter, like, this is going to go down, but I didn't think this would go down all the way out of the top 10, which certainly took me by surprise. But I think it's just, at least The Searchers is certainly going to continue dropping down over the next few decades, although it's still going to probably remain seen as the best Western of all time, like at least in the foreseeable future. I certainly agree with that. I think it's the best Western of all time. And as I said, it would be my ballot if I had a ballot. I'm not a film critic, so I don't. By the way, that's an interesting thing. I just said, because just because you're a film critic, you don't actually get to have a ballot. It's only 1,600 film critics. A lot of the vast majority of film critics don't actually get a ballot. So there's no. I would like. It would be interesting to see what is the system, by what metric do they decide who gets a ballot and who doesn't. That would be is there a consistent system, or is it just they kind of just decide on the spot. That would be interesting to know, certainly. So I already said a couple of things that I like about the poll, a couple of things that I personally dislike. Obviously, this is my take on what this poll is. So Buster Keaton, it isn't good for him. He has two movies on this list, so of course, still highly regarded director slash actor. Sherlock Jr. and The General. We've got all the way down here. Where is it? Spot 95 on the tie. This took me by surprise that he dropped down this much. In the 2012 version, he was, let's see. So he was at 34 and 59. So he dropped down, and this took me by surprise. And he isn't on this year's director's poll at all, which is unbelievable. Unbelievable. He's such a great director, and I found that unbelievable. I just, it took me really by surprise. I mean, a lot of great movies on the director's poll, of course, but that there isn't a single Buster Keaton movie. I mean, that is quite astounding. And another theme that you could probably see in this poll is that there are a lot of contemporary movies, a lot of very recent movies. We've obviously got Parasite from 2019. We've got Moonlight from 2016. And we have, where is it? Portrait of Lady on Fire, which is from 2019. And I mean, that's just insane. I think they certainly haven't stood the test of time yet. I've only seen Parasite out of the three, so I can't really speak for them. I'm sure they're great movies. I mean, I'm sure I'll enjoy them. But I mean, I certainly think that these movies have to kind of stand the test of time. I don't know whether you would agree. I mean, you can let me know in the comment section. But this is just 3 years ago. How do we know that this is actually a great movie? I mean, again, in my hypothetical ballot, the newest movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which it's totally fair to vote for movies beyond that, or even until 2010. But 2019, that's just 3 years ago. I find that very recent, and it's going to be interesting to see whether in 10 years, whether they're going to stay this high, or whether they're going to move down, because I think that is certainly a possibility. Let's talk about a couple more notable omissions. So, obviously, Robert Bresson, I hope I pronounced his name correctly. He currently has, where is it? He has, Auhazar Baltazar, like I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correctly. And he also has A Man Escaped, two very interesting movies. A Man Escaped, especially, is also very entertaining. Um, but his movie Pickpocket left the top 100, which is surprising because it was one of his very highly rated movies in the old list, and I think Pickpocket is his best movie. So I certainly find surprising that the other two movies are still on the list and that one is left. Um, Probably the most surprising film that is no longer on the list to me, it's got to be Raging Bull. I mean, Raging Bull is, first of all, a phenomenal movie. It's a phenomenal movie. It's a very well produced movie, and I think it's Martin Scorsese's best movie. I haven't even seen that many Martin Scorsese movies, but from what I've seen, it's I think it's his best movie by far. Let's see. It was at spot 53 in the 2012 poll, and now it's not even on the list, which I think is I really like that took me by surprise. I mean, obviously Taxi Driver is still on the list and Goodfellas too, but Raging Bull, like the fact that isn't on the list, certainly is very surprising to me. Also, Lawrence of Arabia isn't on the list, which seems like a movie that should be in the top 100, especially from the top 100 critics poll. It seems very interesting that this is not on the list at all. And then also, if we look at Renoir movies, obviously we already spoke about The Rules of the Game, from 1939, so that's still in the top 20. But his other two movies, which were on the list in the 2012 list, were A Day in the Country and The Grand Illusion. And it's probably understandable that one of them left the list, or could have been predictable. But both movies left the list, which is again comes as a surprise to me, especially in A Day in the Country, which is one of my favorite movies. I think it is a masterpiece. I think it is a really, really well made movie, and it could have been it might have been my hypothetical ballot. I'm not sure. It's only 10 movies, but two of Renoir's movies left the list, which I find surprising, and also classic Hollywood kind of really, really suffered under this 2012 list. So we've got Howard Hawks. He used to have Rio Bravo in the top 100, and he had a couple more in the top 250 in 2012. So obviously, we'll know what the top 250 are this year in a couple of weeks. I presume we don't. We only know the top 100 so far. So Howard Hawks had Rio Bravo in the top 100, and he also had movies such as like I have the top 200. Goodness, I have the top 250 here. So he also had Only Angels Have Wings, which is certainly would be on my hypothetical ballot, and The Big Sleep, and a couple of other classics in the top 250. Red River, down here. So, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs in the top 250 in general, and also other movies like Ernst Lubitsch. They haven't been, he hasn't been in the top 100 last decade, so it's totally predictable that he wouldn't have jumped up. But we'll see whether he still is in the top 250. He had 3 movies in the top 250 last decade. Trouble in Paradise at 122, then To Be or Not to Be somewhere down the line, and The Shop Around the Corner. So I think they're 3 masterpieces. Ernst Lubitsch is, I'm currently reading his biography by Scott Heyman. Very interesting book, and he's my favorite director after Hitchcock, if I had to choose. Really, really great director. And Trouble in Paradise would have been in my ballot. So but he's on the list. Frank Capra isn't on the list either. On this year's list, he wasn't on the last decade's list either. So not a surprise. But still, I mean, It's a Wonderful Life. It Happened One Night. Certainly, these are a lot of the big Hollywood classics, which I think it's surprising that they're not really on that they're not on the list. I think that is certainly surprising. Howard Hawks, Ernst Lubitsch, Frank Capra. Maybe I'm missing a couple of people. Preston Sturges, maybe. But those movies, I feel like it's interesting that they're not on the list. And also, if we look at Billy Wilder's movies, he has a lot of movies. He has Sunset Boulevard, Some Like It Hot, and The Apartment, I believe. He maybe has even more. I think it's just those 3 though, and no Double Indemnity. I mean, what? I still don't understand this. Okay, but great director, and these are 3 really good movies. I personally would have voted for Double Indemnity, maybe Some Like It Hot, if I had to choose one of his movies. But yeah, it's interesting. Double Indemnity was not in the top 100 last decade. I'm not sure whether it was in the top 250. Yeah, we can have a look, but was the wrong list actually. But you know, I would have predicted that would have moved up because I feel like, especially retrospectively in film noir, this is oftentimes listed as the best film noir, of the noir period. I would have suspected that a lot of directors, if they pick like, oh, you need to have one film noir in your ballot, that I would have suspected a lot of them would pick Double Indemnity and it would move up, but that did not happen. So that's certainly a surprise. Um, one last point I want to make: Fritz Lang, another one of my favorite directors. Obviously, I'm commenting mainly on my personal favorite directors. His movie, he has two movies, M and Metropolis. They also used to be on the 2012 poll. They kind of inverted, so M moved up, which fills me with delight because it's one of my favorite movies. It moved up to 36. I found that surprising. It used to be really high, and then decade for decade it moved down a little, and now it just jumped back to 36, which I find very, very surprising. And also, I think it's very, it shows that film critics nowadays are still watching this 1931 masterpiece and, being fascinated by it, and even more so than 10 years ago, which I said it was surprising. It certainly is. And also, if we're looking at, obviously, Jean-Luc Godard, I would have been certain that he would have moved up like that. His movies would have thrived. And he has 4 movies in the list. So, like, he really can't complain. Like, he's got 4 movies. And he had the same 4 movies in the 2012 list. But they all kind of moved down a little, especially, like, Breathless over here. It used to be in spot 13, I believe. Let's have a look. Breathless. Yeah. It jumped all the way down to 38. Which, okay, it's probably predictable that he would have moved down because kind of his, the immediate influence he had on cinema is now less apparent because obviously it's been more time. But the fact that he died this year, surely that would have would have kind of prompted more critics to vote for him. Like, surely that would have been the case. I'm certainly surprised that he kind of on average moved down a little, even though he's still very well represented on the list. And also, by the way, Jean-Luc Godard, it's his birthday today. I mean, it would be his birthday today at the time of recording, so happy birthday, great director. Apart from that, I think this is a solid list. A lot of interesting things. We've finally got some animated movies, which I think certainly was a blind spot. I'm not sure whether I would turn to anime. I personally can't really get into anime, but certainly some very influential movies here, so it's understandable that they're in the list. Spirited Away used to be in the top 250, so it's yeah. You could have thought that it would move up, and it did. Francois Truffaut's The 400 Blows moved up too, which is great because it's a great movie. It's a masterpiece. So a lot of you can see possibly because it's targeted at a younger audience, and maybe we have more younger critics now. The voter pool obviously doubled from roughly 800 critics to 1,600 critics. So I would presume probably a lot more younger voters, and considering The 400 Blows is a coming of age movie, a lot of people would vote for that. Certainly understandable. It's a really good movie. One final note, I might have already said one final note a couple of times here, but silent cinema is not doing well on this list. Let's put it this way. Battleship Potemkin dropped all the way from 11 to, let me see, 54. From 11 to 54. I mean, that's crazy. And Sunrise obviously dropped to 11, from 5 to 11, so but just in general, silent cinema has not been doing well here. It's probably also worth noting the director's list. I've got it over here. So, probably a little bit more sophisticated actually with 2001 at number 1. 2001 certainly feels more like a movie that could be named best of all time. I mean, I'm sure you would agree that it feels more like a movie that feels like the best of all time compared to Jeanne Dielman. I wouldn't list it as the best of all time, 2001, but Citizen Kane, The Godfather, Tokyo Story. I mean, it feels a little bit more sophisticated, but Jeanne Dielman is still number 4, so certainly a very popular movie. You Can't argue with that. A very popular movie. By the way, did directors have ballads of 15 movies? Because, Martin Scorsese's ballad has been released, and it's at he had 15 movies, which is, wasn't it 10 movies? Like all the other ballads that have been released had 10 movies. So maybe it's like a thing where directors had 10 movies and excuse me, critics had 10 movies and directors had 15 movies. I don't know. But certainly Martin Scorsese had 15 movies. It's a great list though. He has a lot of great movies on there. Yeah, so that's basically my immediate thoughts. Personally, I think, especially for classic cinema, and just like a guide to classic cinema, I think the 2012 list is better to start with. This list has a lot more modern films, which is not a bad thing at all. I think not a bad thing, but as a guide to cinema history, especially with regards to silent cinema and a lot more like very fundamental classics, like I think the 2012 poll is still king. But of course, still got a great list here, and I'll certainly watch a couple of movies from here, and I'll be interested to see how they hold up. Yeah, make sure to follow me on Letterboxd and Twitter if you haven't done so. And otherwise, I'll see you next time if I upload another video, if I find another topic to film about. But yeah, so yeah, I'll see you.